Sit down.
He's messing with you. All yours. Hold order the City of Fulton meeting. Can we start with a roll call? Sure.
Dan Hunsaker?
Here.
Justin?
Here.
Timothy Mellett?
Here.
Darlene Rowe?
Here.
Gary Connor?
Here.
Ruth Causey from the City Council?
Here.
Staff, and just a quick introduction. Clayton Workman, City Manager.
Michael Bidwell, Associate Planner.
Justin Peterson.
And we're expecting John shortly, and Haley said she wouldn't be able to join us tonight.
Well, can you say your name?
Michael Bidwell.
Bidwell. I struggle with my glasses. I either have the glasses that are good for reading or I need to get some bifocals. Yeah.
Bifocals, it doesn't always help.
All right. Well, nice to meet you, Michael.
Meet you too.
Anything more to say with our new plan?
Just glad to have Michael on board. I'll say he's got his schooling here in Oregon. Maybe he can take a few minutes to give his own background a little bit, but he's been on, I'll just say work-wise, he's been on for a few weeks now. He's already done a couple of staff reports, one pretty major staff report on a large commercial building for the new pharmacy that's coming in. That was all Michael that took care of that one, and he's already got a lot happening. He's been running around like crazy today. He's like, man, busy. I said, that's why we hired you. So I got a lot of stuff done today that I otherwise wouldn't have because Michael was doing the planning today. So, but yeah, Michael, maybe just give a quick history on your background and where you come from.
I grew up in Kansas, Manhattan, Kansas, which is an ag college town. Started at University of Kansas in transportation planning, ended up moving to Portland and then continuing at Portland State. Never got my master's degree because, don't ever write a paper that challenges inadvertently the chair of the program. Politics. Instant denial at that point, but and I've studied Oregon land use law and took all of the grad courses in that. So about 14 years ago is when I finished all that. So a little bit's changed since then. And then I worked as a permit technician in the city of Portland for almost 3 years, and then city of Manhattan as a planner, and then came here.
Okay.
So you bounced back to Kansas and then west again.
Yeah, and it's like my sister moved back because my parents are getting up there in age and both have significant health issues. And my sister was a caregiver for 20 years, so that gave me the luxury to look again. And then this job came up randomly. I'm like, why didn't I see this one before? I applied, and the rest was history.
Okay,
Good to have you.
we got a few weeks to rewrite our entire zoning code, but
No rush. We do have Michael going out to Dare Village on Wednesdays, so he's here Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Wednesdays he's contracted out to Dare Village, and he's been out there a few weeks already. Getting his feet wet, helping them to try to get their own zip code established, which is planning / political / impossible, but he's taking it on.
I can't imagine that happens very often these days.
No, so he's been making some progress there as well. Anyway, we're glad to have him on board.
Thank you. So, approval of minutes. Are there any comments or motions?
I'll make a motion that we approve the planning commission minutes for June 17th, 2024 as presented.
I need a check.
I'll second that.
And even though you aren't always here, with something like this, it is completely legitimate to vote on it,
Okay.
because you're like, yeah, he made the motion, he seconded, it looks like minutes. I'm not gonna pull it, sir, but it looks appropriate, and you can go yes. That's what the lawyers tell me anyway.
Okay.
So,
Or no.
yeah,
Or no.
but I can see not seconding when you're like, I don't know. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. So with that, we can move on to planet-friendly areas.
Thank you. So just kind of, I don't have a presentation today, but in the packet there's a memo and then the new code language. So this is kind of an update from our meeting, original meeting in March, and then the meeting in May, and kind of addressing planning commission members had several comments that we took and had a meeting with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And through that, tried to kind of address all of the comments that planning commission members had. Nick, who was previously here with me, he's not with COG anymore. He has moved on to kind of other adventures. So we're kind of catching up in terms of staff a little bit, but that's kind of an update. And so you have a question or?
Yeah, I was curious what the process was like. I mean, did you take our questions back to the LCD and then they like, oh yeah, we've got some things to modify here, so let's make some changes for the whole state, or was it just clarifications?
Clarifications, yeah. There are no rule changes, but clarifications on the code and what we needed to implement in terms of definitions.
Okay.
And I can walk through these. I don't think it'll take too long to walk through all these, and I can answer additional questions. If there are more clarifications needed, there's still, in terms of the current timeline is adoption by the end of the year, and I think the goal is to kind of add it to your existing code work that's occurring now. There is an option, which I talked to Chris about, but there is an option for alternative dates, but it can be folded into the existing code update. It seems like that timeline could be met.
Right. So I felt like your memo here was really pretty good. Just kind of clarifying what our comments were and how they got resolved and what the changes were, and they got reflected back in here. So I would suggest maybe a very high level review.
Okay.
No need to read the memo to us, but if anybody has any questions.
One question, when I was going through the draft, the 2023 draft version of the CFA, it was talking about that a city could require a first level like office commercial in an otherwise multifamily use or residential use. But it looks like in the updated code for 660.012 that they've added in there unless there's an agreement for affordable housing to a timely. So does that mean that it can't be mandated anywhere, or is it just relegated? It can't be on the bottom floor.
So in that case, it would be anywhere. So in I guess thank you for bringing that up, because that was one of I'd say the larger changes, but there's now an exception for affordable housing for multifamily, and so that you would not have to have that bottom floor commercial if it was designated affordable housing. So if there was a nonprofit that came in and was building affordable, then you would have to allow that on the. I mean, there still might be opportunity to work with that nonprofit, and in terms of if the city wanted that commercial, maybe there might be. But in terms of the zoning side, yeah, that would have to be allowed. And then there's the part kind of in the C1, we require, or the city would require the ground floor commercial except for the affordable housing. And then outside of that C1, it's more open in terms of it could be multifamily floor.
Another question, of course, not finding where I wrote it down, but on the talking about for cities of 5,000 to 25,000 minimum jobs per net acre, or in this case, 60,000 square feet. How does one forecast that? So, for example, let's say a business came in that was going to be on the bottom floor and said they were going to have 20 jobs, but then after they move in budgets and everything, it's 10. Does that end up penalizing the municipality for not meeting that net jobs requirement if it was promised at one level and then what comes in is actually lesser than that?
That's a good question. And they, DLCD tried to amend that section because it used to be the jobs number, and I can't remember that off the top of my head, but meeting a certain number of jobs per area, and they changed that to, in the code language now, there's the 60,000 square feet that would have to be met. So it's actually a little bit more, I think, clear and objective versus the trying to calculate how many jobs are actually going to come in. So they DLCD, I would say, tried to address that in their rule amendments that they did have a few months ago now. So it's, I think, in the findings, and this is something where we can still support with this, the city will basically have to show that that 60,000 square foot per acre could be met. And I think it's not an extreme standard to meet, because it's basically at the most dense level you could meet that standard, and it's unlikely probably that level of density is occurring development in the city.
So is there anything you want to run over high level in your memo in general?
I think they're mostly those minor changes. I think one thing that was interesting, they were definitely okay with cutting the definition down in the area, because I think there were a lot of concerns about the abundant tree canopy aspect that came up. So in terms of what's adopted into the City of Philomath code, it can be a lot shorter definition.
So that definition still exists at the state level?
It's in their rules, but then the city only has, basically I took the first 2 or 3 sentences it was, and that's what's adopted, not that longer. I think if you're reading it from, if I'm a property owner coming in, it might be more confusing than it needs to be.
So the rules aren't really at the point of state law where it would sit above our code and supersede it in any way. It's what they have to decide. Our code has to comply with their rules, and once we get our language in here, our language.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter what their definition is?
I think their definition still matters. We'll keep DLCD involved in terms of that they're checking to make sure we're meeting the rules. So I think that's where the adoption of the code will occur. When that occurs,
Yeah.
there's kind of that checkbox that they've looked at our.
So in 3 years, when this is all in place and somebody comes to do a development and they make an application, do they only have to meet the letter of our zoning code, or is there some reference back to the DLCD definitions?
It would be our code.
So you said it matters, but what you mean, it just matters for what they're gonna approve?
Yeah, the adoption process.
But then legally, the development is only gonna be based on what's in ours.
Yeah, our definition has to be close enough that they're willing to approve it
Okay.
based on their definition.
Okay.
So in that case, their definition matters, but
Right.
it doesn't have to be word for word. It needs to be
Right.
close enough.
So it just matters for the approval process.
The approval of our code.
Yeah. So what's that process look like when we're done with our code? We submit it, and then there's some hearing. I assume DLCD is going to have a hearing, something public where they go through and review our code and then approve or deny. Or
Yeah, and they there's the plan and the same process that the city goes through for other code adoptions, the pop-up plan amendment. Forgetting the full acronym, but the pop-up that Chris or the planner Michael will submit, and then the DLCD is reviewing it through that process. They did review the study that was initially completed, kind of the first phase, and in general they were kind of good with kind of our findings. And we've sent drafts of the code to DLCD staff to make sure they're taking a look at it as COG staff has worked through it as well. But that pop-up process is an opportunity for DLCD to comment, and if there were concerns, DLC did comment, or others. I mean,
Right. So in this case, we're talking about, abundant tree canopy as language to be adopted. Is this sort of like an exemption that DLCD's like, well, you guys will be more lenient in our review of that language in your code? And that's kind of like a handshake understanding that when they go through that assessment process and they don't see that language in our code, we're not going to have any problem.
yeah, and they were okay when I talked to them with adopting the definition that's in the memo, which is that full.
Well, that does, I mean, that does sound a little confusing. Not, I mean, I believe I understand what you're saying, but, I mean, well, could they turn around and say, oh, well, no, you have to put abundant tree canopy in there if somebody else is reviewing it?
Yeah, if somebody's on vacation when it needs reviewed, I mean.
You know,
it sounds like we've got the paperwork, we've got a, paper trail we're doing our due diligence.
oh, yeah.
I just want to understand kind of how that process works.
I'm a little surprised that they would let us put a different definition in than what they've previously established.
Yeah,
What
as long as
it's
it's not
supposed to be.
contradictory. I mean, lawyers will argue about definitions all day long, and
Sure.
one will have one definition, another have another, and they're both correct. So I think that's what it gets down to. It's as long as we're not contradicting
Yeah.
what they've approved and the language is a little different, it's something we're comfortable with.
And I think, if we're gonna argue the case, our landscape standards provide some level of tree canopy. And that's what they're gonna say in their review is, yeah, you've got landscape standards in place. Meets our intent, so we don't need you to put that in the definition so that every developer is wondering what he has to do to be abundant.
That's a good example.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. That in the city's existing code, there's the streetscape standards that would still need to be met. I mean, I think the question that kind of we went back and forth a little bit on in May is that abundant tree canopy.
Right.
But I think in terms of what they're looking for is that you have those streetscape standards built into your code. Most cities already do.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
That clarification.
If I can, the next section down the allowed uses section, there was some question about the automobile uses. And there's some guidance there on that second paragraph, the second sentence, second paragraph, PC. Planning Commission may consider banning automobile-oriented uses within the C1 zone. All other automobile uses would be subject to the design standards. We don't necessarily have a ban, we just have gone through the arduous process of identifying allowed uses within that C1.
Yeah.
And if something was more automobile oriented, we just didn't allow it within that C1 zoning. So we've essentially done that, but we haven't just said automobile oriented uses are banned. We've just identified what is allowed, and those aren't banned, right?
Yeah.
So
This first definition really makes that, I think, your discussion. Yeah.
So I think we're good on the allowed uses side of things as far as those automobile uses.
I think in that case, we'd want to, sounds like we'd want to tweak the 030B to just be, say, automobile-oriented use in the overlay shall conform to the design standards instead of that they're not be allowed in the C1. So I think that would be a clarification that we'd want to change. Those design standards that are, they're pretty specific in terms of how it would need to be designed, but if the city, within the C1's already kind of gone through that detailed process, you're pretty well covered there anyway. So I think that would be a change to 030B to just say, automobile-oriented uses in the overlay shall conform to the design standard, which is it's a little repetitive and that you have those design standards there, but I think it's good to make it clear in that section. We can make that change and get it back to Michael and Chris.
I have questions about the additional work under the CFA process, but is there any other comments or questions on the definitions and everything? I appreciated the clarity on site, net area, and floor area ratio and all that. That's better now.
If COG, next step is to support the city as needed in the adoption process, and it'll be part of a larger package of updates. So we'll be supporting Chris and Michael as needed, and then for it got delayed a little bit, but there's a real kind of I call it a baseline look at parking in the area. Actually, not just the CFA, but a little beyond the CFA, looking at generally a parking count and some ideas for parking management. It's not a full parking plan that DLC didn't have money for a full parking plan, but it's a little bit of funding to kind of get the city started in terms of a baseline idea. And there's a multimodal gap summary that cities have to do, and I think it's maybe a 2 or 3 page document that looks at current projects that are within your transportation system plan that are bike ped, and then looking at kind of just a high level analysis of connectivity of bike ped within the climate friendly area. It's would be attached as a finding within the staff report. We're working with Corvallis on theirs and got a pretty good draft, but now I need to work with Chris and Michael to get that going for Philomath. I think one question I have for you, Chris, is in terms of the GIS data for your TSP, if that's available. If not, we can kind of just take a look at the TSP and identify what's within
So I don't know that we got any CAD files or anything over with our TSP.
Okay.
I mean, not to say that Kittleson might not have some still on file, but I don't know that we've incorporated any of that into our GIS map that we're using regularly.
Okay.
We've got some easements and utilities, but I don't know that we have a lot of traffic data in our GIS.
Okay.
Some very significant multimodal projects within the streetscape project with like the two-way cycle track and some other stuff that is very specific to non-motorized transportation, especially in the downtown core in that CFA area. So we'll need to make sure we're looking at post streetscape construction versus anything from more than a year ago.
So the schedule has both of those things happening June through September, but you're saying those are all shifted back?
We're still, I'm targeting still those deadlines of September so that you have those for adoption. That's the parking strategy work. You don't need to attach to your CFA findings, but the multimodal, you'll want to have that as part of the findings. So that's, I'll work with Chris and Michael to get that draft over here. That's going to becoming, now that Corvallis is drafted, we're kind of prioritizing Philomath next. It was just a question of either we look at that GIS data or more so the visual read through of the TSP and finding those projects, and also I think a lot of what we'll talk about is the existing work that's kind of occurring right now and in the middle of that.
guess, question I have is with the combining this with the other work that we're doing, and our expectation is to have all that other stuff done by December. But this CFA thing, if I understand correctly, has to be done by December. Is there any chance that, I mean, I guess my thought would be if we want to make sure that we have this done so that it can be adopted by December in case the other isn't ready to be adopted. So I guess, I mean, I get the idea of putting them together, but that may not always happen either. So I guess, I mean, obviously the point is to get it done. So I guess it would be there to be run through or go through the process of adopting it, whether or not that other was done, right?
Yeah, and I'm still looking at, 2 meetings of September, 2 meetings in October, and be ready to go out to the public by, middle to end of October with results and hearing in November and get in front of the city council in December kind of thing. Worst case scenario, it's January and we're non-compliant for a week or two while we're waiting to get through public process, but alternatively, I mean, if we just look at this, the danger is we're going to spend time holding public hearings and addressing just climate-friendly areas, and it's going to take away from the emphasis we're making on the rest of the code and the zoning and everything else. So I think they go hand in hand.
Oh, no,
It's going to feel like a little bit of a time crunch, so it'll take a little bit more commitment from this body to meet a little bit more often, which we'd already kind of talked through a little bit. We haven't done great at that over the summer just because we've been transitioning and vacationing and doing some other things that we needed. So I think if we buckle down September, October, we can commit everybody to a couple of meetings and get through stuff. I think we get out to the public, first part to middle of October and get things gone through the end of the year and make those time frames still. We have to give notice to DLCD 35 days prior to our first hearing. But again, as soon as we go to the public, we're gonna have a pretty good idea of, 95% of all the language we're looking at. And then if we need to make adjustments to that code after those public hearings, that's okay. DLCD is gonna be fine with that. They'll just wanna know what those changes are after the fact. But we don't have to keep going back to DLCD every time we make a change. They just wanna see what those substantial changes are 35 days prior to the first hearing, knowing that we can still make those changes after the hearing till what gets finally adopted. I'm interested as we're doing that on how much we need to, and we may literally go through and just highlight the climate friendly area changes that are required and try to distinguish those a little bit from the other code changes that we would like to implement, just so that they stand out a little bit more. And we can, again, highlight them both to DLCD. Here's the climate friendly area code changes that are being proposed, and then here's the other code changes that we're looking at as well. So
I think that would also be good for our public outreach.
Right.
Here, these highlighted changes are required by the state.
right, required by the state, required by the planning commission.
Yeah.
Well, we're supposed to be open to their input.
Well, I used
Yeah.
require, loose enough.
Well, the DLCD stuff is not as flexible as our proposed changes.
Right.
And not to complicate it, but I can send you what because Corvallis I think is in the process of requesting a little bit of extra time with adoption, but I can just send that to you if it ends up being of interest. I don't think it's a big process.
To request additional time.
Yeah, but I don't want to say request additional time and then that makes you not as like. I think got another year.
I think unfortunately, most of this timeline is on you because we've done a lot of the work to get to where we want to get, and it's just pulling everything together in a document.
Yeah.
And if Michael had been here for 6 months, he could do it.
No, it will. But again, having Mike on board, like I said, he spent a solid 8 hours today doing stuff that I normally would do, which freed me up to get other stuff done, which means my tomorrow looks really, really good for getting back into code and doing some time. So I will have a little bit more time having Mike on board, and Michael's got good experience in drafting code as well. So even if he's not as familiar with our code, there's still some of this that I can funnel to him as well. So I see us being able to make some good progress, and we've spent the last month just kind of onboarding and getting familiar, but he's hit the ground running really well. I'm very optimistic about being able to have a great meeting in September and really get some progress over the next 4 to 5 weeks.
I feel like that's doable.
Yeah. And again, we're not bringing a lot of new stuff to you. These are things we've talked about, we've vetted out. It really is about getting it on paper and getting those changes in front of you in a format that looks more familiar than the previous format with the other cities' code and things. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of surprises or things we need to talk a lot about. I think it's more just reading through and say, yeah, that's what we talked about. There may be some new things that are come through, but again, it'll be
There's
stuff
a few
that's in
things we'll
line with
still
what we
disagree
talked
on,
about.
but
There are. And we'll take a vote.
but
and we'll move through.
it shouldn't. I think we've been working well together. It shouldn't take a lot of time.
I'm still optimistic we'll have it done by the end of the year. If we get to first part of October and it feels like a little more time, then we reach out to DLCD and we go through the process and we cross to another 6 months or another 12 months, and we'll be in good company.
That's 2 meetings from now.
Another 6 weeks.
Okay.
We move from process onto some specific language here. I do have some comments on this.
Let me address one thing on the parking. Justin did a nice job. The parking inventory, parking strategies, kind of a bonus. I mean, DLCD said we have some extra funding available. Other things that we're needing, and directly tied to the climate-friendly areas is that on-street and off-street parking issue. And so we're taking that opportunity to look at not just the climate-friendly areas, but also the spillover into that whole downtown area. So we're getting some DLCD paid for work to look at our downtown traffic issue. It's not or parking issue. It's not a full-on parking study, which would look at not only locations, but time of day, current uses. We'd have people out there multiple days inventorying how many people were parked in what locations for how much time, how many days. We're not doing any of that. This is a matter of physically, how many spots do we have? What are the potentials for more spots? And what are some recommendations to kind of build out your on-street parking and then looking at that off-street as well. So it's a very kind of high-level plan, but I think it's a good plan for us going forward to help prioritize additional on-street and off-street locations for parking. So I just want to, publicly thank DLCD for the extra funds to look at that, but recognize it does have a direct impact on our climate-friendly area. We're just growing it out a little bit more to include that entire downtown from 7th down to 14th, 15th area. So,
And it'll be timely because that's one of the things I anticipate us arguing about a little bit.
yes.
So, to your previous comment, I'm not sure what lines up anymore on this Gantt chart, because the deliverable for that was in December. So, how does that line up with our timeline of the next 2 meetings before we go out to public community?
The parking strategy don't have to be part of the findings. That was kind of an add-on, giving ourselves a little additional time to work on that. I think ultimately, when the adoption process occurs, parking's a key part of kind of the area. So it's important to kind of have that initial look. So that's part of the reason why we scoped it out a little further, is that it doesn't have to be in the adoption documents.
Okay, but do we want to have those findings as part of our overall code adoption discussion?
So how far are you talking about pushing it out?
I would say keeping it, what we were still targeting was the end of the
It's in December.
year, yeah.
By the end of December, yeah.
Rather than the end of September. For the parking.
No, it's on there through the end of the year. No changes.
Yeah.
The point was, if we need the parking strategies sooner, so that before we go out to the public with all of our stuff, but I think the climate-friendly area parking provisions are straightforward. We may not like them, but they are what they are, and this parking study is not gonna impact that, I guess is what we're trying to say is.
And I will point out that the schedule's missing a month. Missing October.
No, thank you. That's good.
He's here to
Slide it on.
Got another month in there. That's my birthday.
Taking it off.
I just skipped my birthday.
He's taking the month off.
It's his birthday.
My kids tried to do that. It's my birthday month.
All right. Language?
Is there any need or plan for the type of parking study you described?
More so for the city council and the Public Works Committee on prioritization for off-street parking. I think we're gonna see the need as Philomath downtown revitalizes and we start seeing some more infill for businesses that I'd like to stay ahead of that problem. I'd love to have a parking problem in the downtown, but I'd also like to have a solution. So part of the solution is identifying where we can increase street parking and off-street parking and what that's gonna take. Specifically, we looked at the streets, 11th, 12th, 10th and on down. Could look like and what kind of additional parking we could clean from those streets if we move the curb lines in, for example, and striped as opposed to having the narrower pavement and the public right of it's being utilized for private parking or private yards or whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot to gain there. And that's just in between Main and Applegate. There's also area north of Main Street and south of Applegate that could be identified and could add some on-street parking that we'll need. And then it's a matter of prioritizing that and going through that process of what are the priorities and then what are the costs and rolling that into capital improvement plans and, future projects. So that's where I see it. Less of a planning thing, but definitely an infrastructure side of things.
Because none of that affects any of the zoning language.
Not really.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions on the first page with definitions?
All the definitions that we originally talked about.
No, this is just definitions that relate
Just
to
the
climate-friendly areas.
ones. Yeah.
Well, I think just the ones that go with climate-friendly areas. We have a whole bunch more definitions to go.
No, yeah, I understand that. I thought there was even more definitions we were talking about in our previous discussion months ago, but I couldn't find and didn't bring that document. But I understand these definitions here on this page are what DLCD went and talked to them about. None of the other ones changed, I guess it's.
Justin, are these just the ones that changed, or these are all the new definitions that we need to have in the code based on the audit?
These should be all the ones that were at the previous meeting. They're quite a bit shorter in some cases.
I think when we looked at them with all of our other definitions because we were looking at discrepancies between. We didn't want to have them contradictory.
And I'll double check. Sure.
But they were, I guess I was assuming that these were the ones that we had issues with. The rest we were okay with.
Well, the rest, we did have some other issues with.
But, they're not.
They're not this problem.
Yeah, not related to the.
They're our problem.
Okay, so these are only to do with the CD.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, gotcha.
Anything else? Next page. Map?
Not. So yeah, there's still some discussion on the map. We've been very careful along to call this the draft map of the proposed area. But honestly, to vary from this, we need to have some good sound reasoning, and I'll also discussion about impacts or potential impacts and consequences intended and otherwise, so unless, I mean, at some point, we need to stop calling it draft and say this is the proposed, this is what we're gonna be submitting. And if that's not tonight, then it needs to be pretty soon, so.
Does it, or does it go from draft to proposed after a public hearing?
We need to tell DLCD what the, I mean, just like code language, this is the proposed code language, it
Okay.
can still change after
It
the
can be
hearing.
our proposed, and then have a hearing, and then it's our.
But it could change.
The two red boxes, I could read the,
Now, the legend's
Fine
not
print.
really a legend.
what are those?
That's zoned R2 right now, I believe.
Well, I mean, why do we have them on there?
I think it talks about the Philomath block size, is that what it is?
Yeah, those, and I can,
What was that
this
one?
map was originally I think it was, our GIS staff built it, and it was probably 11 by 17. It was a larger map, but I can see if we can work on making the legend a little larger. And then those squares, the red squares, we're trying to get at block size.
Can you read the legend, the first two items on the legend?
Yeah, so, and that's actually leftover language that we can update. It says Philomath Site B, because originally when we came with the studies, we had Site A, B, and C. But I need to get that updated, so it just says Philomath Climate Friendly Area clear. And then the other red square says Philomath Block Size. And that was mainly trying to help us with our total acreages as we were kind of thinking through that, so that's something that I think can be deleted for the final map.
Okay.
And then what about the one to the right, over to
block.
the east on Applegate?
Both, one was just kind of trying to show a full block, and one was trying to show more of like a half block, was the idea back when
All
we-
right.
They have little acreage size call outs on them. on the map.
Yes.
Just as a suggestion, you could probably narrow your view of the map and pull the legend out separately and just use this white space on the page to show an enlarged legend, like next to the map. Instead of just using what GIS generates. Just a suggestion.
I'll work with our GIS analyst to change it.
Or just make the big picture bigger, like a half a page. Okay.
Just a big note, like, make sure that we can read the street numbers and signs there.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need a lot of the detail, but at least the street names would be helpful on the map.
Main and Applegate and 13th at the very minimum.
Yeah, even if it wasn't every street, but
Yeah.
just make sure we can enlarge those. I know GS is infamous for having difficult to read.
Tiny
street
little
names, but-
legends, and then when you zoom out on a computer, they stay tiny.
Yeah.
Okay. I do want to know if anybody has plans for big discussions about those limits for the climate friendly area. Points made in the past, I keep looking at Tim.
Move the map.
I didn't come prepared to talk about that.
Well, I asked if you have plans for talking about it in the future and thinking about agenda for future meetings, and we did just kind of.
I think from my point of view, there's a lot of arguments or discussions I can present, but I don't think the time we would put into it would glean any results that would be significantly different than what we've already got. I think, you know, there's things about this I take exception to, but we have a huge amount of work to be done over the next 3 months. And the reality of the climate-friendly area is something that may take 25 years to even to begin to develop. and to try to create a more perfect outline at this point, I don't think it's worth it.
I think that the amount of time and effort that we've spent looking at our zoning and allowed uses and where those new zones will be put is gonna have a much greater impact on how Philomath downtown develops
Than
than
this.
the language in the climate friendly or where the boundary is.
I concur with that.
We started with the premise, and I've said it so many times, I don't think the climate friendly areas is gonna have a big impact on Philomath because we're already headed that direction.
Right.
We've already got a lot of this code there. And so I'm very comfortable with this area, with that mindset, that I don't think we're gonna see, you know, if you shifted everything a block to the east, our underlying zoning is still there, that zoning language is still in place. There's a few additional exceptions, but you're talking about a block or a half block, east or west. So that's kind of where I land as well. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because to me, it's not a dismissal of the climate friendly area language. To me, that speaks volumes to the amount of time that we've spent talking about our zoning and allowed uses and getting that right. And I think we've come a long way there.
Well, on the next page, under B, we had the proposed language, get rid of the first sentence and change the second sentence to just be automobile-oriented uses in the overlay shall conform to the design standards, which kind of doesn't need to be said, but if DLCD wants it there, I'm fine with it. So I guess it's good to have it there, just so that you know that the climate-friendly area overlay does not change the zoning. My comment on this page is that 50 density, B, it says new development shall have a 1.0 floor area ratio, but I think it should say new development shall have a minimum 1.0 floor area ratio. Or 1.0 floor area ratio minimum. Anyhow, the word minimum needs to be in there, I believe. It's not a exact or a max.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we go back to 030C? Justin, I think you had a comment, this language, multifamily buildings located in the underlying C1 zone shall include bottom floor commercial. Didn't you say that it should also, it has to allow for residential on that bottom floor, or was that you, Michael?
For low income.
Yeah, for low income, if it's designated low income.
Yeah, it does. And it looks like it got covered in subsection A under that.
That's what that covers.
Yeah, that covers that provision that got added to the OAR.
Is that,
I didn't quite follow that.
Oh, so in the OAR, it talks about that when there's a affordable housing multifamily agreement, at that point, we wouldn't be able to require ground level being commercial office retail.
So how does the language here reflect that?
Is that we, in the C1, we can require and do require the first floor to be commercial still. A is the exception to that, is that if it's subsidized affordable housing, it can also occupy the first floor.
so is this,
Say that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking.
They're both upset.
Little a, not big
C,
A.
little a.
I was going to the other page and looking at the big A.
Yeah, maybe.
So the recorded agreement that runs with the land requires affordable or affordability for an established income
All right.
level.
Never mind.
Can there be a little more language added to that in lieu of the commercial? Because it's still, I mean, if you read it about 3 times, then, you know, I get what it's trying to say, but somebody who is not reading it in detail, somehow say that, you know, this is an exception where we don't require ground floor commercial. and actually use those words in little a.
Yeah, I think I agree. We should look at wordsmithing that a little better. I want to understand though, this language does not apply to existing non-conforming. So this would be under any new development, and that development has to also contain a recorded agreement for this exception to be in place, correct?
Yep.
So, like you mentioned in, your example, a nonprofit is building this multifamily building. And then I want to help me understand how that process would work going through city approval. Is that something that would come before us in order to approve this exception, or would the city planner approve that exception?
Kind of follow whatever, depending on the size of the size of it. If it was a fourplex or a triplex or something like that, no, it'd just be administrative. If it was subdivision, it would come in front of you. If it was, so it just follows the normal process. And either way, they're submitting the same documentation. They're just showing proof of a recorded, some type of recorded document on the deed that has a restriction there for income.
Got it. Okay. Okay, yeah, so then,
It's an affordable housing push, right? It's an added benefit for affordable housing, for subsidized housing.
multi-unit buildings are containing.
And I can wordsmith that to say, something along the lines to make it clear that that's an exception to ground floor.
That run.
And I
with the
can
land- Yeah, ground.
Draft
floor.
it and send it to Michael and Chris for final review.
It might even be as simple as just putting the word like exception at the beginning of that subsection A, and then that, because what you list there is legal.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, but also this like runs with the land, we really mean ground floor. Requires affordability for established.
It runs with the land, the legal term that it's,
Yeah.
the deed is
Okay, it's,
attached to
I
the
see.
land. But it really, when it says runs with the land, it's, the deed is against the property, not.
In that C above, it says includes bottom floor commercial. Shouldn't that be ground floor? I mean, I suppose they could have underground or something, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good.
So it would still be C1, but it would be completely residential, low income.
Yep.
Okay.
It's almost like it's an overlay with an additive use, so it's like in this case for this, because it's in the, it would be allowed where it otherwise would not be.
Right, just wrapping my head all the way around it. Okay.
Okay.
And further.
Yes, they want it to be very commercial, but there's a bunch of ways you don't have to have it commercial.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and I think in some sense it makes more sense in my mind for some of the bigger cities that have larger downtowns than a smaller city with small downtowns, but how the rules were written, it applies across the
Yeah,
board.
so it would still be zoned C1 if that nonprofit moved on and sold the property or whatever, it could be used for commercial on the ground floor. Okay, that makes sense. 030D subsection A. ADUs are allowed in conjunction with pre-existing non-conforming single detached dwelling units regardless of minimum density requirements. That means that R1 that's rezoned to commercial, called C1 for example. So an R1 in this area that's rezoned to C1, even though they're existing non-conforming, they can still build an ADU.
Yeah, this, I guess, I'll step back. This only would apply within the CFA area, but
in the
if
CFA.
I'd say more to the north or south end, there's, I think, a couple single-family existing homes on lots, but it's trying to clarify that if someone on those wanted to redevelop and build an ADU, that would still be
That's allowed.
as long, yeah, then that's just clarifying that you still have that option rather than say if you wanted to redevelop the.
And that language is coming from COG?
That language was a clarification that we got from DLCD, that we should have that in there.
Okay. I don't remember seeing that last time.
And that is new.
Okay.
Yeah, because I can see one potential challenge on some of those, like they're in the OR that's going to be like rezoned to residential, where the lot size, because of this, the rear setback, so if they put an ADU, they have to have, it's supposed to be a 15-foot rear yard setback. And if those lots are not very deep, that's where it could be a potential issue with implementing that just from the setback requirements alone.
Yeah, you still have to, on any of those, you still have to meet the setback requirements and the other development standards. This is just saying they're not right.
Yeah, but which one?
Yeah,
Is it
so-
the new zone or the R1 non-conforming zone? I really don't envy you guys for having to review some of these potential issues that come across your desk.
No, it's new. I mean, just because you've got so let's look at the house. You've got a house in the C1 zone, and they come in and say, we want to add an ADU. Well, what are the setbacks for an ADU in a commercial zone? Within the C1 district, you have no setback requirements, right? So your commercial zone, you don't have a setback requirement. That's what we enforce, because we assume that use could change tomorrow, could be converted to a commercial use. So why would we require a 15-foot or 10-foot setback if the change of use occurs tomorrow and now all of a sudden it's a little office space and we've got an artificial 15 and 20, 15 or 10-foot setback from the property line. So it's based on the current development standards for that zone, even though the use may be different.
Existing non-conforming.
Right. Which is why in our code currently, we don't allow for an expansion of that residential use. So our current code doesn't allow for an ADU for a pre-existing non-conforming.
Right.
But then the CFA, we have to allow for it.
That's why I brought it up.
Maybe also on that small a that you have start out with exception or the word exception. I don't know, just to kind of grab their attention.
Right. Thank you for humoring me.
You humored?
Just thinking, okay, an exception on the front end of both of those subset A's.
Yeah, I think that should be good. Yeah, I think overall the goal there was that a lot of the goal here is that you're adding more housing opportunity, but it didn't want to in a way prevent housing opportunity for pre-existing. So where like as Chris said, if you had a house and then you're going to be considered an expansion of a non-conforming, then that ADU is not allowed. But with this, it kind of gives that opportunity for an additional unit and try not to.
We actually do want to restrict that in C.
Okay, and just to be clear, where there's the non-conforming is where we're changing like R1 to C1. That makes it non-conforming.
Yep.
Well, and there's some
But within,
non-conforming already in the C1, C1 now.
but within the CFA zone, if you're existing non-conforming, you can still build an ADU, even though the rest of our code doesn't allow it for anywhere else within the city.
And I'm not sure, Chris, maybe you could answer this. In the C1 core, are there there's single family homes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's several.
Just on those half blocks?
Yeah, there's several in there. I mean, maybe a dozen or so. I have to number them, but yeah, there's several. And we've had some that have asked to expand, and we've said no because you're non-conforming, and it's supposed to be commercial use, and you want to expand your residential use. We don't allow you. You can add a kitchen, you can add a bedroom, right? You can add to the size of your home, but you can't add a duplex. You can't add an ADU. We don't allow you to go from one unit to multiple units. So that would be an expansion of the non-conforming use, which our code doesn't allow, except if you're in the area now. So, I won't go toe to toe here, but with DLCD, it's like, if you've got a non-conforming use in your downtown and you want to maximize the use of that property, whether it be for commercial or residential, the worst thing you can do is allow a non-conforming use to build new, right? I mean, once you build that new
Become less
ADU,
From R1 to R2 instead of.
well, so you've got your single-family home and you want to do an ADU, and first we say no, because our code doesn't allow it. Okay, fine, then I guess I'll sell my house and I'll go buy a different house that I can build an ADU on. And now that lot comes up for sale, well, who's gonna develop on that lot? Somebody who's looking to redevelop that lot into something that's got more commercial and or more residential. But if you let that existing property owner build the ADU, how likely are they to move or do anything different with their property in the next 20 years? Much less likely, because now I got what I wanted, I got my ADU. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot by allowing this, but that's an argument to have with DLCD. They've made their decisions, they know best, so this is what we have. But I think it's counterintuitive to what they're trying to do, which is let's get the most housing and commercial development on this lot. The way you do that is not by expanding your non-conforming uses.
In the very short term, it probably makes more housing, and in the long term, it makes less.
Yes. Yes.
I'll confirm, because off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact OAR or where that was in the guidance, but I'll confirm.
Just double check.
Yeah, I think that's worthwhile. Next page. There's still a heck of work to do before December. We're gonna make tracks. I'll start off with one. Under B, in the first paragraph there, it says, note that the CFA is mostly built out on. Is that just a note for us that'll be deleted? For the image?
Yeah, that can be added, I think, as a finding versus in the code language.
So might make the same comment about this first section, it's just a couple sentences. We've gone through this in our code revisions about, kind of language that's it's really just kind of trying to describe the spirit of the law rather than this is the law shall be A, B, C. This section's intended to promote the walkable. I mean, I understand that is the intent of this section, but do we need to state the intent, or can we just state?
This language is actually really helpful when I'm sitting down talking to the developers to go through intent, because they want to start nickel and diamond and wordsmithing, and I go right back, what's the intent, right? And so it really does help to have the intent there. I like having this type of language in the code. You can go overboard. I don't think this is overboard. I think this is useful language when we're sitting down talking to property owners and developers.
Okay, thanks, that's good feedback.
So my next question is, under design standards, A1, at the very end, it says pedestrian entrances must be designed to be barrier-free. Does that have a technical meaning?
Yeah,
So,
I think that is getting at ADA standards, and this, for reference, the design standards, those are directly from the OAR. Those follow in this case, they do follow the OAR.
yeah, is that the right way to say it, though? Should it be a little more, barrier-free per ADA guidelines? And is that really just talking about the physical entrance of the building, or is that like sidewalk widths and all that kind of stuff?
Well, with the ADA, you're gonna have a path of travel. That's an ADA entrance, so it's going to include all of that.
So it's everything.
It's from wherever you enter the site, whether it's by vehicle or by pedestrian, all the way to that point.
Then the first sentence in that same paragraph kind of says the same thing, but again, it's like intent, right? Versus, I don't know, it just seems like barrier-free could be not understood by some people, but
Yeah.
maybe it's fine.
I think the key there is all pedestrian entrances must be designed to be barrier-free. Before that, it's saying the primary pedestrian entrance of the
Okay.
building must be
Yeah,
oriented.
good point.
And then the last one is all pedestrian entrances must be designed. So now you're talking staff doors, back doors, alleyway entrances, which is a little bit higher threshold, but
Does that really belong here, since that's true of anything that's gonna be built anywhere?
No, because you do not have to provide, according to ADA, you have to provide ADA access to the primary entrance to a building.
Okay.
Secondary entrances do not require ADA access.
Okay.
this is a higher standard but it is in the standards.
It's in the CFA standard. They've added it.
Are we gonna have a definition that says what barrier-free is? I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't say be designed to be ADA.
That's the right language. The ADA compliant shall be designed to be ADA compliant.
I mean, and everybody knows.
That's
what that-
and that's a civil rights law. That's a
Yeah.
law. Barrier-free is,
It's a little slang from that,
yeah,
or is it?
yeah, I would argue it's slang.
Okay.
If I do something that's barrier-free, there isn't, some interpretations of ADA use the term barrier-free.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, ADA compliant would be.
Yeah,
It should say ADA compliant as far as I know.
You were saying that
That this language,
their code, the LCD, says barrier.
that's where it's coming from.
In this case, this section was coming from the way ours.
Can you change it?
And I mean,
You're okay with that?
it might be similar to the case of the definition, going back to the climate-friendly area, where as long as our design standards are meeting the intent, and I think the intent here is that you have if you redo a site, say, that it's oriented towards pedestrians, so and the bus facilities, biking facilities, and then parking's on the side or rear, and then you have within that site you have access in terms of paths needed. And I think that's broadly speaking the intent of this, but this might be a section where we could narrow it down some.
Yeah, and I would even say that first sentence, they're actually using two different terms. Accessible to people with mobility disabilities.
Yeah.
I mean, both of them, if I understand it, both of them mean ADA compliant.
That's right.
And they're even using two different terms to say that, which are not even that.
Well, it's like some of the other language we've asked about the past, going back to them, is that they've used, obviously who's written this is
Right.
not familiar with the Americans with Disability Act. Okay, they're more interested in, oh yeah, we need to make sure it's barrier-free. And it's where the language, I would go back to them and say, we would recommend that this be changed to using the proper term for the proper information, because the frustrating thing as a designer is when I open up a code and a standard and I have 3 different definitions for the same thing,
No,
and it can be nothing but, so I'm with whoever started this path, I'm with them. I would go back to them and say, are you talking ADA? Well, then you should use ADA.
Yeah.
Because
Point to ADA directly.
point to ADA, shall be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
But didn't you say that would only require the primary?
But they can add the criteria that all entrances shall be compliant with ADA. They can add that statement.
Yeah.
And that then does make it at a higher level than the ADA. But if I'm a designer, I know what the ADA says.
Right.
For my architectural license every 2 years here in the state of Oregon, I've got to take a 3-hour course. Actually, this last one was 9 hours on the Americans with Disabilities Act here in the state of Oregon. So as a designer, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. So
and you know what that is, and there's.
I
no
know what that is backwards and forwards.
You don't have to ask any questions.
I don't have to ask any questions. you know, and a developer would know what it means too. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. It's the wrong language to be
So
used.
Justin, let's check and just see if we can substitute ADA compliant in the first phrase there, and then change to ADA compliant in the last instead of barrier free as well. See if DLCD is okay with that more specific language. I mean, ADA has a lot more to do with than just access, and I think they're trying to focus on the access portion. But if that's what we are trying to get to, then I think it does make sense to be more specific.
I do want to continue this conversation just a little bit more, because just to help kind of direct Justin in his conversations, because I'm not sure if we put the language in here that says all entrances must be ADA compliant, that just points the designer to ADA, and the designer says, oh, primary entrance, we're good. Maybe we do want to include specific language that we can pull from ADA and point it at every other entrance.
No, because the ADA is very specific to primary entrance, and then, but if you add the statement, all entrances in the CFA has to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, you've then overridden it.
Okay.
And ADA is a minimum, and now you've gone another level higher with the
And if you
CFA.
worried about that, you could make it more clear by saying must be compliant with ADA accessibility requirements.
That would maybe be a better set of language.
Okay.
What he
So I
just,
guess-
is what Gary just suggested.
The question is,
Why are you holding buildings within the CFA to a higher standard?
Because DLCD said that we should.
Well, because it's
No,
CFEA.
because you decided you want a consistent definition.
No. What I'm saying is when you talk about barrier-free design,
Yeah.
it is driven by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And all I'm saying is they're using the term barrier-free design on an entrance that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not require. But because the state is saying in a CFA, you have to provide barrier-free access to these other entrances, that we clarify that.
Is it ambiguous as to what the design standard is?
And I think it's because it's the CFEA, not the CFA. It's climate friendly and equitable areas. And so I think that this is a shot at having these areas be more equitable and accessible for everybody. So I think this is a nod to that accessibility issue.
so I think we get the idea. I'm sorry, go
Why
ahead.
would, if that were true, why wouldn't they specify ADA for all entrances? Why wouldn't they have said that? They didn't say that.
No.
And I
They
think
just said barrier free.
I think that's what we're getting at, is we kind of see what DLCD is trying to get at, but not quite precisely enough that we feel comfortable it would eliminate any questions from a designer or have any loopholes in our code. So the question is, we need to go back to DLCD and say, is that your intent? Are you talking about ADA here? And why don't you point directly to ADA? Is that right? Are we all? Okay.
I do have one more point about all of that. It does say all pedestrian entrances. At first, when I read that, I said, well, that's people coming in to buy something. But the people who work there are pedestrians. So that could, if that's what this is saying, could mean every entrance, no matter where it is in the building.
It does. I mean,
Oh, you think it does already?
No,
No.
I mean, this would make it every entrance. I mean, I've been in relatively new, like, apartment buildings in downtown Portland where you're gonna have a back entrance that goes right to stairs, you know, and the only entrance that's ADA is out around front, but that means anybody with a disability has to go around the block where there's no parking and then use that front door. So somebody's really trying to create, I think they're really trying to create, like Chris was saying, this certain area within every big city that is more equitable to disabilities.
I mean, like, say if it was, you know, employee entrance only, if there was a sign on the door, that would still need to be
That would still be
compliant.
barrier free for their language, but we think it's better to point to code rather than somebody argue about what that means.
I want to piggyback on something that Chris was saying that was directed to you about like getting clarification on, or like on the definition, or if they are okay with changing the language. And if DLCD says no, this language has to be in there, would we then want to make sure that's one of the definitions? So that way it's clarified what this, what that specifically means. Because I know by implication from my end, it's like making sure it's like, it's not just mobility disabilities, it's the other seen and unseen disabilities, and making sure all of them can access the entrance.
Right.
But from a developer perspective, it may not be so clear, and I think that is going to be bridging the gap to make sure. So if they want that language in there, then we just have to find a way to make sure that it's understandable. Yeah. I know, bridges together.
Yeah, but just as an editorial comment, if again, I go into a code and I read through the definitions and I have multiple definitions of the same thing that's used in the language of the code.
Yeah.
That is just a recipe for disaster. And there's a high probability that the design professional is going to miss the other definitions. And then you're gonna end up, it's gonna be a do loop.
Well, but if you have a question, somebody like there at DLCD may say, oh, you're right. That doesn't make sense to just have a definition of saying that use ADA.
No, I agree with you on that, and that's.
I mean, they may mean something else. Who knows?
And then if they're adamant about that language has to specifically be in there, we
Then
just
you
gotta find a way to.
Then you do what you said.
Yeah.
And then we're in
Trying to cover
compliance
that
and
completely.
everybody's happy. It's there in writing, it's in the fine print.
Thanks. I got one. In the next, in two, there, motor vehicle parking, the last sentence says bicycle parking may be permitted. That might be that it's permitted in any location, as opposed to the rest of the sentence being about motor vehicle parking beside or behind.
Yeah, you're right. That doesn't make sense because number 7, development standards must be consistent with the parking requirements. And
Yeah.
it points to.
So, and I would get rid of the word may, because then it's like, well, is it permitted or is it not permitted? But that sentence just didn't make any sense in a couple different ways.
And you can't count motor vehicle parking spaces towards bicycle parking code.
But the bicycle parking could be in front of the building on, with the bicycle rack.
Right. I
on
think
the sidewalk.
that's what they're trying to say. Because the
But,
rest of it is where you.
why are you combining it? Because the subject
I don't
of
have
the
any.
sentence, the subject of the whole paragraph, right at the beginning of the first sentence, is motor vehicle parking.
It might be best.
Subject of that whole paragraph.
It might be best to strike that sentence and put anything you want to say down in 7.
I agree.
Yeah.
If I'm reading that
Oh,
provision,
yeah.
and I think what it's trying to say, it's talking about where, okay, vehicle parking can't be in the certain area, however, bicycle parking would be allowed in that same, that's how.
That was my assumption as well.
Yeah,
Well, which would be different. I mean, like I say, typically you would have it right in front of the building. But they're saying, oh, and you can also put it here.
Do we in our standards about bicycle parking limit where the parking can be?
That's the
Well, kind of, we don't limit it, I would say, but we do direct them where to put it. I was just looking at it earlier.
closer to
This
the
one section.
entrance, that kind of thing, not in the public right away.
Yeah, and it's also required if there's a bus stop nearby.
Yeah.
You have to have covered bicycle parking, depending on the type of building.
Yeah, I think 7 can stand as it is, and we just delete this sentence.
as long as 7 does meet the CFA requirements. So if there's any other bicycle parking requirements of CFA that go above and beyond our PMC 7540, we should incorporate them in 7.
Do you know, as part of the street improvements, are they putting racks?
In the public right of way,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're out there. There's several of them out there already. Those are beautiful.
I think the fix, I think 7 is fine on its own, but I think we just clarify in 2 to say bicycle parking is permitted on or along the primary facing street. Since we're saying what's not allowed there, and I think what they're trying to say is bicycle parking is allowed there. We just clarify. Bicycle parking is permitted on or along the primary facing street.
And we want to put that in 7?
And 2.
Because 2 is saying you can't put vehicle parking.
Vehicle parking, circulation, access, loading must be located on site. Or must not be located on site between the buildings and pedestrian facilities that are on or along the primary facing street. However, might be nice, however, bicycle parking is permitted and are along the primary facing street.
Well, see, our code already says bicycle parking spaces should be located in front of the uses along the street, either on the sidewalks or specially constructed areas, pedestrian curb extensions. That goes on to talk about parking shouldn't interfere with with pedestrian passage. So are we saying here that parking can be,
Put in a parking lot, basically.
no, it's not saying that. Because then I can't circulate a car in there, so this is talking about areas of car circulation and that type of thing.
Loading and unloading.
And unloading. So it's two separate subjects is the problem I have.
It's just given.
If you want, I would add it to 7. Something that actually explains what we're trying to say, but what makes it any different than what we've already got in our standard? I think our standards is compliant with that.
But to give, of course, the commentary that he likes having in here and make it easier for people to understand when they're not familiar with everything, you could, wherever you put the language, it could just say bicycle parking and access is permitted
Or along the primary facing street.
right,
Or could
per
already says it.
PMC. Well, then you should just say
Okay.
per PMC, blah, blah, blah. And then it just kind of becomes a little bit of commentary here so that nobody has to wonder.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're all saying the same thing. I think it's, you do say the same thing in 2 different locations.
My only question is, Justin, does our bicycle parking code meet all the requirements of CFA? Because that part I'm still not clear on. If we can just point to our code, then everything's covered. But if our code, there's further requirements by CFA, we should call them out by name.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can do some digging on that specifically to make sure that your bicycle parking code is
CFA compliant. Yeah. Okay. That should be straightforward.
And I have one clarifying question on number 6. When it talks about development on sites adjacent to a transit stop or station on a priority transit corridor must be oriented to the transit stop or station. And getting into the definition of adjacency. So, for example, if let's say the transit stop is catty corner, it would still technically be adjacent. So would that mean that in that specific scenario, the entrance must be kind of at a diagonal to face that adjacent stop, or does it? Because I could just see, like, from a site design perspective, having the entrance kind of a catty corner. I mean, other municipalities have done that, but I don't see really any examples so far in Philomath.
We have that in our code, we just haven't had new buildings on the corners in the C1. It's only in the C1.
Okay.
And in that sense, if the transit authority decides to put in another stop, is that gonna affect planning and development for anything around that stop?
So we control where the bus stops are, so we would take that into consideration when we were planning a new location for a stop, yeah. And sometimes those stops are determined based on what land use goes in. So, like we're planning a new stop up on North 19th Street when the RV park goes in, but until the RV park goes in, we're not gonna do anything there. So sometimes the land use approvals determine where the bus stops go.
Going back to that too, and maybe I'm just reading it differently. That first sentence says you can locate all that motor vehicle stuff on site, beside or behind. And then the rest of it's saying you can't locate it on site between buildings or public pedestrian facilities on or along the primary facing street, which would mean that the reason they put bicycle parking may be permitted there because our would allow, our code would allow that on the primary facing street, because that's where the front storefronts are. So that's why they put that in there, and our code wouldn't allow, or, no, wait. They're saying it can't be on the primary facing street, but we would allow it in our code. But or we would allow the bicycles. Oh, yeah.
It already does.
Right. So we don't even need that. Because
But what we're saying is we could leave it as commentary and just refer them to all of our standards.
all right.
Should we talk about bicycle delivery? What about DAX delivery?
Yeah.
DAX deliver to the front, or is that a utile thing to be on the
This
side?
can deliver to any door if they're all ADA compliant.
You push the button and open the door. Rights for robots.
So, yeah. So number 4, is there something definable that says what a pedestrian entrance secondary is versus primary? I mean, does the sign have to be, an inch bigger in each direction and that makes it the primary? What is it that makes a pedestrian entrance primary versus secondary?
I don't have an answer. And I think what I might do, just because there are a lot of kind of questions on this section, is really hone in on, because this is new from our last time here, hone in on this section with DLCD staff and see maybe other cities also maybe taken this and simplified it a little bit, because I think that might be the.
I think I understand what they're trying to get at, but I just don't know how we're going to enforce.
Yeah, and when I'm reading that, I'm thinking of like the site review that I had to do for the pharmacy. And it's like, because they have 2 entrances, one's the public customer entrance and then the other's the delivery staff entrance. And both of them were essentially ADA compliant. So it was just like one of those. So it's like, I think it's like, how I'm, it's like if it is an entrance, then yeah, it's like the primary would be wherever the customers would also come in, and then the other would be like for staff delivery. Kind of where my brain is with that.
Well, but
Going back to 1, I think the primary entrance is oriented to the public pedestrian facility. So that's, I think, where they were.
But they could have a customer entrance on the backside where the parking lot is, right?
Yeah, but all this is saying is that is a secondary entrance. But based on what you're saying, this paragraph really doesn't make any sense at all. it doesn't belong. It's not giving you any more information than what's already available in the document, what it talks about. Your primary entrance shall be from the public pedestrian, shall be directly connected to your public pedestrian facilities, i.e. the sidewalk. That's your primary entrance. So obviously, if you put an entrance on a parking, which you cannot put in the front of the building,
Right.
because there's another section in here, has to be on the side or the back, then that's going to be a secondary entrance, because the primary entrance is still on the front of the building that faces the street or the public pathway.
Yeah, I think the point is, there's no distinction between a primary entrance and a secondary entrance. They both have to be ADA compliant and
Yeah.
both have to be open and,
We're talking about number 4, right?
yeah.
Yeah, but we're also talking about one, because it says the primary entrance, but if you have a business that has a front,
No, I understand that. Here's what number 4 is saying. Number 4 is saying there's got to be a distinction between the primary and secondary, and the primary has to be open for the public during business hours.
yeah,
It's still not saying a lot.
It's
but
it's really not saying
It's not a
anything,
definition, it's not.
because you could have tertiary entrance. You can have 3 entrances to the building.
have
It
eight
really
points.
doesn't matter, as long as the primary is where the primary is supposed to be. And here it's talking about, it must be open during business hours.
That means the secondaries don't necessarily need to be open.
Open.
Unlocked, or.
That was the
And
only.
that's exactly what it's saying.
But what if a business comes in and they have street frontage, and they've got a sidewalk right in front, and they've got a little door,
That's the primary entrance by the CFA code.
and then on the backside, they've got a parking lot and great big glass double doors with the nice sign above it? I mean, is that compliant?
I would argue yes.
Just secondary.
Just saying you can't lock that front door.
Okay, so if it's only about the locking, then they can do whatever they want. And then-
Yeah, so then basically back where you're talking about your primary entrance, paragraph 1 is where the issue with the door must remain unlocked during business hours is where that statement belongs.
I'd agree with that. So maybe when you're asking them about the bicycle stuff, you can ask them, what's the intent with primary, secondary doors? What language do we actually need to adopt here?
Yeah, and I can talk to them, but I think what they're getting at is you'll often see in some downtowns that front entrance is all the time, and then there's no public facing, and then only the back entrance is used, and then it's not street activating in that sense. So I think that's where they're going with this standard, but I'll talk to them in detail.
If that's all it's about, then it's pretty easy, but I guess I was envisioning a case where you have a nice little store developed and the entrance that everybody wants to use is on the parking lot side. And you have a little dingy door on the front side that's also not activating, even though it's unlocked. But I won't try to be too restrictive. I'll let him ask the question.
For number 5, Justin, since you're asking on this, can we get definition of what a large site is compared to a medium or a medium small or a small or
Becky?
I don't know what a large site is.
A little bit bigger than a medium site.
And as I can ask that too, and as we get more into this, I'm thinking that we can overall word to simplify this, but still meet the overall intent of what they're getting at with the CFA standards. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to rework this, and it's the first time as planning commission members that we got to take a look at this. So I think be something that comes back where we'll probably see the most difference compared to the current version that we have as this section. But overall, the goal would be to meet the intent of what they're trying to get at, and we'll definitely run whatever proposal we have by DLCD to get a thumbs up.
I mean, even with those couple questions, a little bit of cleanup work, I think we're 95% there.
Last question is, why is 8 there? And
For us, it doesn't really apply,
It
does it?
doesn't apply.
Yeah, and I think 8 is one, because of where we've defined our CFA is something that we can definitely delete out.
And where cities are putting it, yeah, where cities are putting it in a greenfield location, are they saying that if it continues to develop industrial, they're letting CFA continue to develop
Yeah.
industrial?
And I mean, again, copied straight from their standards, so this, I mean, when I looked at this again today, I was like, yeah, that really doesn't make sense to why that got added.
Yeah.
in
Did we expect them to make these additions or changes? Unexpected?
The design standards.
No, I mean, it's all this additional stuff. Are they gonna keep adding stuff all the way up to the deadline?
No, this with the last version to this version, we were good comments back from them, so I don't think we're gonna get anything substantial back from them. That's my reading.
And have a map amendment. Great industrial land on the east end of town.
Yeah, the purple up there.
Just, in fact, we'll even double the size of our CFA.
There we go. Wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe I'll have to turn that language in there.
Going back on 6, the last sentence, it says, if there is inadequate space in the existing right-of-way transit infrastructure, then the infrastructure must be accommodated on site. How would we,
Like a bus stop.
I mean, are we gonna put in our, planning or our comprehensive plan that we want a bus stop here? And when they come to develop it, we'll say, oh, well, there's not enough space on the road for the transit stops, you gotta put it in your parking lot.
This only applies to a site design that's adjacent to a stopper station. I read this to say, if there's a stopper station right there, and somebody's gonna develop the site, and the bus stop, the little shelter is really close to where they wanna build, they have to back off a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what that's saying.
I think the point's moot because I know where the bus route is today. I've got a pretty idea where the bus route's gonna be 30 years from now. And we've got public right of way along Main Street and Applegate Street. I can't envision a day when the bus is going up 15th Street or up 14th Street and looping around or anything like that. I mean, it's gonna go down Main Street and back up Applegate, and we've got right of way there for the stop, so
Doesn't matter.
I don't think it's gonna affect us in the next 30 to 50 years. Town, mass transit train, then we'll talk different, but
High speed.
high-speed rail comes through town.
High-speed rail.
That might impact some private property owners. I took note of that as well. I just don't, looking at the map, I don't. And where it has, so we talked to, as an example, when Letman came in at the RV park, we required that they put a bus transit on their property as one of their conditions of their approval. So it's not out in the public right of way, it's actually on their property, it's just immediately adjacent to the sidewalk. But we wanted a spot to be able to put a bus shelter there, rather than just putting a sign up in the sidewalk, have people stand on the sidewalk for the bus. So that was a requirement of their site design, that was that's even outside of the climate friendly area.
And there's actually gonna be a pull-off.
No, it'll be bike lane.
Oh.
Like what they do on the highway right now.
Okay.
So, in the outside of the climate friendly area.
Right.
But when, Forest Meadows expanded, part of the condition there was we wanted to double check that they had room for bus expansion, and we made them increase their accessibility. We were gonna make them put a site for it as well, but they have if you've been in there, their mailboxes are all covered, and it's a lot more covering than they need room for the mailboxes, so there's plenty of room for people waiting for the bus to find shelter. So it didn't make sense to add a new bus shelter right next to an existing shelter area. But we did make them redo the sidewalk so it was accessible, because there was just a curb up to the mailboxes, and it wasn't ADA accessible, so we did make them redo the curb and add some accessibility there, so that somebody waiting for the bus could go. So as that builds out, when the bus does go north up 19th Street, when the RV park goes in, we'll have a stop at the RV park, and we'll have a stop at Forest Meadows as well, and it'll actually pull into their site on site where the mailboxes are, pick up, and come back down 19th Street. So there's a couple examples where we have required on-site transit improvements to be made. That has nothing to do with climate-friendly areas. So again, anything within the CFA, we're going to do the same thing where it makes sense.
It doesn't cause a problem for it to be there.
In both examples, the developments were happy to accommodate for the bus shelters. It was good for business.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments about CFA? Okay, thank you very much.
It'll be interesting to see what we got on.
They say.
Yeah. And Chris, is the next update long or short? I wanted to touch base with you on,
I think it'll be pretty short.
if you don't mind.
Not at all. Yeah, let's touch base.
So staff update.
Any questions?
Yeah.
It's been busy, but yeah, questions on anything listed there, happy to.
So the annexation went through, the city council upheld our decision. That's good. That feels good. So the owner was happy with that ruling?
No.
Accepted?
Fine.
Or do they expect to appeal that?
No.
I guess is what I mean.
We'll pass the appeal period.
Good. Okay.
No, I think the council did is they added a little bit more language, rather than just saying it does not meet the criteria of being more appropriate than the proposed. They added to that and stated why it wasn't more, and they cited pedestrian amenities, access to transit services. I forget the specifics, but anyway, they just added a little more language and just be more general, which the language is a little more just says it doesn't meet. They defined why or how it didn't meet.
We discussed those issues.
We did talk about it. And city council discussed similarly, and so as they were talking, then I made some recommendations to just substantiate that you had come up with already, and they didn't have any trouble doing that. So, and frankly, I don't think it was something that the owner could refute either.
Yeah.
So,
I'm happy to hear that it was approved.
What, down there at the bottom, commercial permits, what's Glorieta Bay? Is that a person's name?
That's Letman. That's Letman's development. That's his company name.
Oh, okay. And S4S?
S4S Incorporated is. Okay, good question. Everybody's all these code names for all their projects.
Sorry. It's okay. It's just more curiosity.
I'd have to look on that one. So.
What's the development at the corner of Applegate and 7th?
Oh, that's gonna be, Benton County Schools Credit Union. Site plan or approved prior, and then working on the partition right now.
Yeah, because that's what I saw. I saw the partition.
Yeah.
It's 2 lots now. They're just joining it to 1 lot.
But they're moving ahead with the construction. That was my curiosity. Is the construction's moving
Initially, we
ahead?
were keeping it separate because the word at the time for the water treatment issue, it was quarter is what we were hearing come down as anything more than a quarter acre, you'd have to do on-site water treatment for your stormwater as well as detention. So we were keeping the 2 lots separately and actually developed them separately. One was the lot with the required parking and the other was just a parking lot. Separate developments submitted at the same time. And when we got into pre-construction with the developer and the county who oversees our stormwater management, the language had been clarified to mean a quarter acre of developed or, well, not developed, impacted land. And because with the building and the parking lot and the other parking lot was less than that quarter acre, and they decided to go ahead and just merge those two lots, tax lots into one tax lot, mostly for financial reasons. And there wasn't going to be any negative impact on them for stormwater treatment, as if there would have been, because both those lots together are more than a quarter acre, but the impact is less than a quarter acre between the two lots, so. Anyway.
Sale of the Interfor property, would you envision that land being annexed into the city?
No.
Would you like to expand on that?
It's already in the
If
city.
I owned it, I would not annex it into the city because I wouldn't want to pay city taxes. They have a water source, they have a sewer source. There's really no additional city services that they would be interested in, and knowing the new use, I don't see them having significantly different water or sewer needs than what the previous operation had, so I don't see a need for them to annex into the city.
So it will, as far as you know, continue to be an industrial site.
Yeah, which we should talk about, because on our current map revision, we left that as R3, because Interfor was going up for sale, and we thought there might be an opportunity to still do the R3 there. I've not talked specifically about that property that's now been sold with the new owner, but I envision they're going to be in a similar situation as Interfor was, and that they're not going to be that interested in having new residential development right next to their industrial site. So they may also want to look at doing a zone change there to industrial, but I haven't had those conversations yet. But
That's part of the sale, is that lot as well, the R3 lot?
yes.
So you're just talking about the lot along the highway, or the 19.
Yeah.
Because the mill is in the city.
No, we're talking the mill on the west end of town,
Oh,
that's outside of city
there.
limits.
Oh.
It's in the urban growth
Right,
boundary, but outside city limits. And then the westmost lot that's inside city limits that is currently zoned R3, we had initially had discussions about rezoning to industrial, but we decided to keep it R3. But my hunch is that new property owner may be more interested in our zone change to industrial.
So they didn't buy out on 19.
They bought both.
They bought-
Oh, they
They
did
bought
that.
both, yeah. And the rumor mill is out on who bought it, but it didn't come from City Hall.
So who is it?
You can check social media, but it didn't come from City Hall. So we are very respectful when property owners come to us with development plans, and
Well, who should I ask?
Somebody who's on social media.
yeah, I
Not
won't use
it.
their name either, because I don't.
I'll change the subject for you.
Thanks.
Does the RV park and the storage units have a timeline for when construction has to be complete? Because both those projects have been remarkably slow.
Yeah, we've done a number of extensions there. They've got a formal request in for an extension that I'm reviewing. I was gonna look through with Michael actually this week. They're self-performing on a lot of that for financial reasons, which means they have their own crews doing it rather than contracting out. So that it's taken more time. So we've been pretty generous on those extensions and allowing them to go through. I do see progress being made. They're not just sitting there.
No,
But
it's
it's been slow, so. If nothing had been done on the RV park, you know, we could talk about something, but they are out doing work. There's infrastructure in it. It's for the office and manager's office and quarters and stuff. We're seeing those permits come in to get approval.
Built the bridge.
They the bridges in. So there's progress, it's just slow, and we're again trying to be pro-business and development friendly, and sometimes that means being a little more patient with developers than what the code strictly says. Technically, the building permit, they've got 2 years once the building permit's issued. The land use approvals are good for 2 years as well. And they have to file for extensions. So they filed for extensions, we'll grant them more than likely and keep going. So we have good contact with that development. I'll just say there's good communication. They keep us informed. They're chugging along. It's not like we never hear from them, don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
which is
it's-
good sometimes.
And it looks to be good work. It's not a problem they're not causing.
Yeah, it's a big project. That'll be the largest RV park in all of Benton County and one of the large ones in, this side of the interstate. So it's a big project and big undertaking. The storage units themselves, one of the largest, again, in Benton County, I think the largest in Benton County. So there's significant investment that's going into there. It's taking some time.
Yeah.
So I am anticipating that third story on the self-storage building going on, because we'll start getting the complaints and concerns, but it's like, if you don't know that's an elevator shaft, it's an elevator shaft and a stairwell shaft, and so, yeah, they're gonna go up one more level, and then people freak out.
So even above what it is now?
Yeah, it's gonna go one more.
It's already starting.
First one? Well, I mean,
People are gonna take stuff up and down there? Oh, you said elevator.
my in-laws sold their house several years ago like 3 years ago, over in Walport, and they called every community from Walport to Lebanon, and 0 storage units available. 0.
Wow.
So,
Now, did I see that some
I know.
are they're able to use some of them now, or rent some of
Yeah,
them?
they're,
Yeah, they have occupancy, they're leasing
For-
spaces out now.
Left there.
Yep.
I mean, that's fine. I mean, that'd help them get started. Put in a little money to put back in it.
Yeah, and those aren't, as much as many people are moving, those aren't gonna rent out overnight either, and so it does allow them to fill what's there now as they're continuing to build, so it allows them to realize some capital. And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
fine.
it's like some smart business. He's not taking out a bunch of loans to build something that's not gonna.
Well, he would argue he has taken out a bunch of
Well,
loans.
he could borrow even more money and make it happen faster.
Yes.
He's not.
He's
right?
not, yes, and again, I think that reflects well in the city, that we've been willing to wait, because had we not, then he would have done just that. He would have
Yeah.
leveraged himself up to his eyeballs and
It's been a long
taken on a lot higher risk, and, well, this isn't his first extension.
Right. That was my point.
Yeah,
Point.
they are looking on that, I will just clarify, they are looking, they have their middle area that was approved for like outdoor RV and boat storage.
Yeah.
And they have officially submitted that, we're going through, and there were allowances in the approval there that it was gonna remain gravel. We didn't want a big, huge asphalt parking lot, just to be sensitive to the environment and everything else, and so that's gonna proceed through. We're working with them on delineating the drive areas from the parking areas and things, just for safety, but that'll go through probably this week. We'll get a response back to them on that to formally allow that to start up, and pretty minimal infrastructure for them. They can start leasing that space out as well for RVs and trailers and boats and whatever. With pretty little infrastructure in place now, they have an on-site manager to maintain that, so that next phase will go in. It's still flexible for them they still maintain that if the RV park is a huge success in their full time, they could expand that further south. If the self-storage is highly successful and they need more space, they could continue to the north. But right now, that middle area between, they're just doing, again, what takes minimal infrastructure. They're doing outdoor RV and boat storage. And it could change in the future at some point, but
But there's also RV camping.
the RV park will allow for the camping,
the river.
so this is just storage. Yeah, just outdoor storage.
Chris, was the third level in the storage area, was that a variance or is that allowed?
Allowed use in the industrial, yeah. So, Philomath, apartment complexes, self-storage. So.
We should move the sign further west.
Yeah.
Chris wasn't busy at all with a few of the COs that had some challenges with DEQ and
Yeah, we issued 2 certificate of occupancy in Mill Pond. They met their stormwater for the most part. They were able to get all of their post-construction report done with DEQ. Not 100%, but good enough that DEQ wrote an email and said they're safe. People can move in. There's some outstanding things we need documentation on, but it was good enough that they felt safe enough to where I emailed and said, if you don't feel they're safe, then you need to tell them they've met all the city's criteria. I've got an email saying it's safe. We're going to move forward. So 2 families are in, another looking for C of O today, and then I think another 2 next week. So those houses on that east side are getting completed, getting their landscaping in. A few other outstanding provisions that they're working on, but good to see new families moving into that street. And so we're kind of resetting some time frames with getting the street paved and moving on to that next phase 3 and Chapel Drive improvements and all of that stuff. So I feel I want to be overly optimistic, but I continue to be optimistic that that developer is going to get around a corner and get into this next phase and be able to get some lending in place and move forward. So far, he keeps chugging away and making it happen. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot of work.
A lot going on right now.
We ready?
We're ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Meeting adjourned.